I'm Tamsin Vesper, 27, and I spent my youth mastering the piano only to use those same nimble fingers to crack the most secure vaults in the city. I stared at my hands, resting them flat against the cold, polished mahogany of the bar. They were insured for $2 million once. Back then, before the world collapsed in on itself, I was playing Chopin at the Royal Conservatory. Now I spend my nights sanding the tips of my fingers with fine grit sandpaper until the skin is raw and pink, just so I can feel the microscopic vibrations of a tumbler clicking into place inside a titanium safe. I took a sip of the sparkling water I hadn't asked for, letting the bubbles burn the back of my throat. The noise of the gala swelled around me, a cacophony of fake laughter, clinking crystal, and the rustle of silk gowns that cost more than most people earn in a decade. I hated them all, but I hated the man standing across the room most of all. I felt him before I saw him. It's a sensation like a drop in barometric pressure, the kind that warns you a hurricane is about to make landfall. The hair on my arms stood up. My breath hitched in my chest, a traitorous reaction I couldn't control. I turned my head slowly, fighting the instinct to run. Dante Morty stood near the entrance, flanked by two men who looked like they were carved out of granite. He was looking right at me. He always looked right at me. He was beautiful in the way a loaded weapon is beautiful, sleek, dark, and capable of ending your life without a second thought. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, accentuating the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. His eyes were the color of ice on a frozen lake, cold and unyielding, and they burned with a hatred that made my stomach twist into knots. I held his gaze, refusing to blink. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. According to the Rossi family, the people who own me body and soul, Dante was the monster who orphaned me. They told me he was the one who put a bullet in my father's heart 3 years ago, leaving his body in the trunk of a burning sedan by the docks. My father, the ghost, the greatest thief the underworld had ever known, had allegedly died owing a fortune to the Rossi syndicate. I inherited that debt. I became the indentured servant of Giovanni Rossi, forced to use the skills my father secretly taught me to pay off a sum that never seemed to decrease. But there was a complication, a truce. To prevent an all-out war between the Rossi and Morty crime families, a blood pact had been signed. It contained a specific, humiliating clause regarding me, because I was Rossi property, a tool to be used for theft and espionage. I was considered unclean by the high and mighty Morty standards. Dante Morty was forbidden from touching me. He couldn't strike me. He couldn't kill me. He couldn't even brush against my arm in a crowded hallway. If he laid a single finger on me, the truce would shatter and the streets would run red with blood. I was the untouchable girl, the pariah. Dante began to move through the crowd, the sea of socialites parting for him like water. He was walking toward the bar, toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I gripped the stem of my glass so hard I thought it might snap. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to retreat to the shadows where a thief belongs, but Giovanni had ordered me to stay visible tonight. I had to stand my ground. Dante stopped 3 feet away from me. He didn't order a drink. He just stood there, radiating a heat that I could feel across the distance between us. The air around us grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made my skin prickle. "You look like a tragedy waiting to happen, Tamsin," he said, his voice a low, rough baritone that vibrated through my bones. He didn't look at my face. His gaze swept over the black dress I was wearing, a modest thing provided by the Rossis, meant to make me blend into the background. "And you look like a murderer in a $3,000 suit," I shot back, my voice remarkably steady despite the tremors in my hands. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. Is that what they tell you? He asked, his eyes finally locking onto mine. That I'm the villain in your story? I don't need them to tell me anything, I hissed, leaning in slightly, testing the invisible barrier between us. I know what you are. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dark, dangerous sound. You know nothing, he whispered. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until he was mere inches away. I could smell him, sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the metallic tang of gun oil. It was an intoxicating scent that made my head spin. He raised his hand slowly. I flinched, bracing for a blow that I knew couldn't come. His hand hovered near my face, his fingers tracing the air just a millimeter from my cheekbone. He didn't touch me. He wouldn't break the pact. But the heat from his fingertips seared my skin as if he were branding me. My breath caught in my throat. I should have pulled away. I should have spit in his face. But I was frozen, paralyzed by a terrifying magnetic pull toward the man who supposedly destroyed my life. I looked into his eyes and saw the hatred there, clear as day. But beneath the ice, beneath the rage, I saw something else, something dark and hungry. One day, he murmured, his voice so low only I could hear it. One day, Tamsin, the Rosses will slip. And when they do, there won't be a truce to save you. He dropped his hand. The loss of his proximity was a physical blow, leaving me shivering in the sudden cold. I don't need saving, I lied. He smirked, a cruel twisting of his lips. Everyone needs saving, he said, especially the ones who think they're already dead. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without looking back. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, my legs trembling so badly I had to lean against the bar for support. I hated him. I wanted him dead. So why did my skin burn where he almost touched me? And why, God help me, did I want him to turn around and do it for real? I stood in the oppressive silence of Giovanni Rossi's private study, the heavy scent of stale cigar smoke and expensive scotch clinging to the velvet drapes. The gala was still raging downstairs, a distant thrum of bass and laughter that felt a million miles away. I had been sent up here like a maid to tidy the aftermath of Giovanni's pre-party meeting. It was a power play. He liked to remind me that no matter how talented I was, no matter how many vaults I cracked for him, I was still just the help. I picked up a crystal tumbler, wiping the rim with a cloth, my movements mechanical. My mind was still down in the ballroom, trapped in the magnetic field of Dante Morti's gaze. I hated myself for the way my body had reacted to him. I hated the way the air had crackled between us. I set the glass down and moved to the massive bookshelf that dominated the east wall. My job was to straighten the leather-bound volumes, but old habits die hard. I didn't just touch things, I read them with my skin. My fingertips, raw and sensitive from years of sanding, brushed against the spine of a first-edition medical encyclopedia. I stopped. I felt a hum. It wasn't a sound. It was a microscopic vibration, a difference in temperature and texture that shouldn't have been there. I frowned, pressing my thumb against the wood of the shelf itself. There was a seam here, invisible to the naked eye but screamingly obvious to fingers that could feel the tumblers of a bank vault shifting through 3 inches of steel. I glanced at the heavy oak door to ensure it was locked. My heart began to pick up a rhythm, a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I pushed the 3rd book on the 2nd shelf to the left. Nothing happened. I pulled the 5th book on the bottom shelf. A soft click echoed in the silent room. A panel in the wainscoting near the floor popped open, revealing a small, dark cavity. I shouldn't look. If Giovanni found me snooping, the punishment wouldn't be a lecture, it would be a broken hand. But curiosity is a disease, and I have always been terminally ill. I knelt on the Persian rug, the plush wool biting into my knees, and reached into the darkness. My fingers closed around cold leather. I pulled out a book. It wasn't a published work, it was a ledger bound in black calfskin worn at the corners. I opened it, the spine cracking in the quiet room like a pistol shot. It was a record of debts, favors, hits. I flipped through the pages, the dates rushing backward in time. 2 months ago, 6 months. 1 year. I stopped at a page dated 3 years ago. November 14th. The day my world ended. The day my father didn't come home. My breath hitched, turning into a sharp, painful wheeze in my throat. The ink was black, the handwriting precise and jagged, unmistakably Giovanni's. Target, the ghost Arthur Vesper. Status, eliminated. Method, 2 shots to the chest. Body disposed at docks, Sector 4. Executor, Rossi Enforcers. Notes, asset daughter secured. Narrative established. Blame successfully shifted to Morty family to ensure assets compliance and servitude. The world stopped turning. The air left the room, sucked out into a vacuum of horror. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, frantic and bruising. I read the words again, desperate for them to change, for my dyslexia to be playing tricks on me, for this to be some sick joke. Blame successfully shifted to Morty. My hands began to shake so violently I nearly dropped the ledger, the paper crinkling like dry leaves in the silent room. A wave of nausea hit me, rolling through my stomach with the force of a tidal wave. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to retch onto the priceless rug. They killed him. The Rosses. The people I had been slaving for, the people I had been stealing for, the people who claimed to be protecting me from my father's murderer. They were the murderers. Giovanni had looked me in the eye at my father's funeral, placed a hand on my shoulder, and told me he would keep me safe from the monster Dante Morty. He had lied. Every moment of the last 3 years was a lie. Every vault I cracked paid for the bullets they used to kill the only man who ever loved me. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, but I refused to let them fall. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford, not anymore. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the nausea, slicing away the fear and leaving only a diamond-hard rage in its wake. I looked down at my hands. These hands were weapons. Giovanni had sharpened me into a master thief, a tool to build his empire. He didn't realize he was sharpening the blade that would cut his throat. I couldn't stay here. If I stayed, I would kill Giovanni tonight and his guards would gun me down before I made it to the front door. That was too easy for him, too quick. I needed to burn his world to the ground. I needed to take everything from him, piece by piece, until he was begging for the release of death. But I couldn't do it alone. I was one woman against an army. I had no allies left in a world that saw me as a pawn. I needed power. I needed a shield. I needed a monster to kill a monster. I closed the ledger, my fingers leaving sweat marks on the leather. I thought of the man in the ballroom. I thought of the ice in his eyes and the heat of his hand hovering inches from my face. Dante Morty. The man I had hated for 3 years. The man who had told me just hours ago that the Rosses would slip. He knew, or he suspected. I stood up, my legs trembling but holding my weight. I tucked the ledger into the waistband of my skirt, hiding it beneath the loose fabric of my blouse. I wasn't the prey anymore. I walked to the door, my reflection catching in the glass of the window. I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. Her eyes were wild, her skin pale, but her jaw was set in a line of granite. I was going to break the truce. I was going to walk into the lion's den. I was going to find Dante Morty, and I was going to offer him the one thing he couldn't refuse. Me. I'm Tamsin Vesper, 24 years old, and tonight I am trading my life of invisible servitude for a one-way ticket into the violent heart of the city's most dangerous war. I slipped out of the Rossi estate through the servants' entrance, the stolen ledger burning a hole against the skin of my stomach. The cool night air hit my face, but it did nothing to cool the fire raging beneath my ribs. I had a plan, a reckless, suicidal plan that hinged on a single event, the Morty Charity Gala. It was the one night of the year when Dante Morty opened his doors to the city's elite, a fortress of wealth and power that was strictly forbidden territory for anyone under the Rossi banner. If Giovanni caught me there, he would kill me. If Dante caught me there, he might do worse. But I wasn't going as a Rossi servant. I wasn't going as Tamsin, the mouse who dusted bookshelves and cracked safes on command. I needed armor. The neon sign of the pawn shop buzzed with an irritating, insect-like hum, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. I pushed the heavy door open, the bell above it jingling with a hollow, tinny sound that announced my desperation to the world. The shop smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. Behind the glass counter sat a man with grease under his fingernails and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. I reached up and unclasped the thin silver chain around my neck. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from a grief so sharp it felt like swallowing glass. The diamond pendant swung in the air, catching the dirty light. It was small, modest, but flawless. It was the only thing my mother had left me before the cancer took her, the only piece of my history that the Rosses hadn't tainted. I placed it on the scratched glass surface. It made a soft clink that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet shop. "I need cash," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Fast!" The man picked it up, screwing a jeweler's loop into his eye. He hummed, turning the stone over. "Nice clarity, old cut." "It's worth 5,000, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "In a showroom, maybe. Here, I'll give you 2. 4, I countered, leaning forward. My hands were flat on the glass, palms damp, and I don't have time to haggle. He looked at me then, really looked at me. He must have seen the wildness in my eyes, the cornered animal desperation that makes people dangerous. He dropped the loop. 3.5, cash, no receipt. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Deal." 10 minutes later, I was walking out with a thick envelope of bills tucked into my coat pocket. I felt lighter, untethered. I had just sold my past to buy my future. I took a cab to the Diamond District, to a boutique that Giovanni's mistresses frequented. The air inside was perfumed and chilled, a stark contrast to the smog outside. I was still wearing my uniform under my coat, a rough, gray cotton dress that scratched at my skin and marked me as the help. The sales assistant, a woman with a smile as tight as a facelift, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Deliveries are in the back," she said, turning away to adjust a mannequin. I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of cash, fanning it just enough for her to see the faces of the presidents. "I'm not delivering," I said, my voice ice cold. "I'm buying, and I need something that stops traffic." Her posture changed instantly. The predator in her recognized the scent of money. "Right this way." I walked past racks of pastels and floral prints. They were too soft, too innocent. I needed something violent. I needed a warning sign. My hand stopped on a hanger near the back. The fabric was silk, cool and fluid like running water, but the color was what caught me. It wasn't just red. It was crimson. It was the color of a fresh wound, the color of the blood that stained the ledger hidden against my waist. "That is a daring choice," the assistant murmured. "Backless, high slit, it leaves." very little to the imagination. Perfect, I whispered. I took it into the fitting room and locked the door. My hands shook as I stripped off the gray uniform. I kicked it into the corner, a pile of rags that belonged to a girl who no longer existed. I pulled the silk up over my hips. The sensation was electric. The fabric glided over my skin, heavy and expensive, hugging every curve, every scar, every secret. I turned to the mirror. The air left my lungs. The dress didn't just fit, it clung to me like a second skin. The deep V-neck plunged dangerously low, framing my collarbones. The slit rode high up my thigh, promising a flash of leg with every step. But it was the color that transformed me. Against my pale skin, the red looked lethal. I looked like a flame in a dark room. I looked like a woman who could burn a city to the ground and laugh while doing it. I wasn't the orphan Tamsin anymore. I wasn't the Rossi's pet thief. I smoothed the silk over my hips, feeling the cool texture seep into my fingertips. This was a declaration of war stitched into a hemline. I paid without blinking, wearing the dress out of the store, my old clothes left in a heap in the changing room trash. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city lights reflecting in the boutique's window. A car slowed down as it passed, the driver craning his neck to look at me. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't look down. I didn't hide. I stared right back until he looked away. I felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a hot, electric current that kept my chin high and my resolve steady. My heart was beating a war drum against my ribs. Thud, thud, thud. I hailed a taxi. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, his eyes lingering on me in the rearview mirror. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and impending violence filling my nose. "The Morty estate," I said, "and don't stop for anything. I'm Tamsin Vesper, 24 years old, and tonight I am walking into a Shark Tank wearing nothing but a scrap of red silk and a death wish." The taxi smelled of stale pine air freshener and old vinyl, a gritty contrast to the fortune I was wearing on my skin. I shifted in the backseat. The movement made the red silk glide over my thighs. It was a sensation that felt illegal. The fabric was cool, liquid, sliding against my heated skin like a phantom caress. I looked down at myself in the dark cab. The dress was a scream in the silence. It was the color of arterial blood, vibrant and wet looking under the passing streetlights. It plunged dangerously low in the front, exposing skin I had spent my entire life covering up in maid uniforms and oversized hoodies. The back was non-existent. My spine was bare against the cold leather seat. Every time the taxi hit a pothole, I felt the vulnerability of it. I was exposed. I was naked in all the ways that mattered, but I was also armed. My hand tightened around the hard, rectangular shape of the evening clutch I had bought with the last of my mother's money. Inside wasn't lipstick or a compact mirror. It was the black book, the ledger, the paper trail that proved Giovanni Rossi was a murderer and a thief. It was the nail in my coffin if I got caught, and the key to the city if I survived. "We're here, lady," the driver grunted. I looked out the window. The Morty estate loomed against the night sky like a gothic nightmare. Iron gates twisted toward the moon, guarded by men with earpieces and suit jackets that bulged at the waist. Beyond them, the mansion glowed with golden light, spilling music and laughter into the darkness. This was the lion's den. This was the fortress of Dante Morti, the capo who controlled the eastern seaboard, the man who had looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred only hours ago. My stomach twisted into a knot of cold dread. I shouldn't be here. I was a Rossi servant. Crossing this threshold was treason. It was suicide. But then I remembered the bullet hole in the chest of the man I loved. I remembered the smirk on Giovanni's face. The dread in my gut hardened into something jagged and heavy. I paid the driver and opened the door. The night air hit my bare skin like a slap. I didn't shiver. I stepped out, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the pavement. One foot, then the other. I straightened my spine, letting the dress do the work. I felt the transformation take hold. Tamsin the orphan was gone. Tamsin the victim was dead. The woman walking up the driveway was a weapon forged in grief. I approached the checkpoint at the gate. Two guards stepped forward, their eyes scanning me from the hem of my slit skirt to the hollow of my throat. They didn't look at my face, they looked at the dress. The red was a beacon, it commanded attention, it demanded submission. Name? The guard asked, his voice rougher than necessary. I didn't have an invitation, I didn't have a fake ID, I had adrenaline and a lie. I'm with the band, I said, my voice low and bored. The singer, she forgot her lyric sheets. I held up the clutch. It was a flimsy lie. It was pathetic, but I didn't wait for him to check. I stepped closer, invading his personal space, letting the scent of the expensive perfume I'd tested in the shop cloud his judgment. I held his gaze. I channeled every ounce of Giovanni's arrogance I had absorbed over the years. Do you want to explain to Mr. Morty why the entertainment is delayed? I asked. Because I don't. The guard hesitated. He looked at the dress again. He saw money. He saw confidence. He stepped aside. Go ahead. I didn't smile. I didn't say thank you. I just walked. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise the skin, but I kept my pace slow, languid. I reached the massive double doors of the mansion. A valet opened them. The sound of the gala hit me like a physical wave, orchestral music, the clinking of crystal, the low hum of 100 dangerous conversations. I stepped inside. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and polite pastel gowns. And then there was me, a blood-red slash in a monochrome world. Heads turned. I felt the eyes land on me, heavy and judging. Conversations trailed off. Whispers started behind raised hands. Who is she? Is she a mistress? Is she lost? I kept my chin high, my eyes scanning the room, dissecting the crowd with the precision of a thief looking for a mark. I wasn't looking for jewelry. I wasn't looking for a safe. I was looking for the king. And then I saw him. He was standing near the far fireplace, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, looking bored and lethal. Dante Morty. He was taller than everyone else in the room, broad-shouldered and imposing in a tuxedo that fit him like armor. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was too harsh to be handsome but too striking to look away from. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was watching the room with the cold, detached gaze of a predator deciding which sheep to eat. My breath hitched in my throat. He was terrifying. He was the enemy, and he was my only hope. I took a deep breath, expanding my lungs against the tight silk. I started walking. I cut a path straight through the center of the room. The crowd parted for me. The red dress was a force field. Men stepped back, their eyes widening. Women glared, clutching their pearls. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes locked on Dante. 10 feet away. 5 feet. He sensed the shift in the room. He turned his head. His eyes met mine. The impact was immediate. I saw the recognition flash in his gaze, shock followed instantly by a dark, simmering fury. He knew who I was. He knew I belonged to the Rosses. He knew I was breaking the truce just by breathing his air. His hand tightened around his glass, his knuckles turning white. He set the glass down on the mantel with a sharp clack. He didn't call for his guards. He didn't draw a weapon. He just stared at me, his eyes traveling down the length of the red dress, lingering on the slit, the curve of my waist, the pulse fluttering wildly in my throat. When his gaze snapped back to my eyes, it was darker, heavier. The air between us crackled with a tension that felt like lightning waiting to strike. I stopped 2 feet in front of him. I could smell him, sandalwood, whiskey, and gunpowder. My legs were trembling, but I locked my knees. I was in the lion's den. The lion was looking right at me. And he looked hungry. "You have 5 seconds," Dante said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest, "to tell me why I shouldn't snap your pretty little neck right here." I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the black book. I held it out to him, my hand steady, my eyes fierce. "Because," I whispered, "I brought the matches to burn your enemies alive. I'm Kaya Vance, 23 years old, and tonight I am walking into the lion's den wearing the color of the blood he spilled." The heavy oak doors groaned open, and the sound of the gala hit me like a physical blow. It was a wall of noise, the clinking of crystal, the swell of violins, the hum of 100 meaningless conversations. I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was thick, suffocatingly warm, and heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and funeral lilies. It made my head swim for a second. I blinked, forcing my vision to clear, forcing my lungs to expand against the tight bodice of my dress. The ballroom stretched out before me like a chessboard. It was a sea of black tuxedos and white gowns, a monotonous display of safe, old money. It was a monochrome world, and I was the wound. I was the jagged ruby cutting through the pristine surface. My dress was a violent shade of crimson, silk that pooled around my feet and clung to my hips like a second skin. I took my first step onto the marble floor. Click. My stiletto heel struck the stone, a sharp, lonely sound that seemed to echo underneath the music. I took another step, then another. I didn't look down. I kept my chin high, my neck exposed, my spine rigid. A hush began to ripple through the room, starting from the people nearest to me and spreading outward like a shockwave. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter strangled into silence. Heads turned. I felt their eyes on me, hundreds of them, sliding over my bare skin. They were heavy, judging, confused. "Who is she? How did she get in? Is she lost?" I could hear the whispers starting, following in my wake like the froth behind a ship. "Look at her. Is that the audacity?" I ignored them all. I wasn't here for the socialites or the politicians or the minor mobsters trying to climb the ladder. I was here for the king. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like fluttering that threatened to make me sick. My palms were sweating against the cool leather of the clutch I held in a death grip. Inside that clutch was the evidence that could topple an empire. But right now, the only weapon I had was the dress. In the element of surprise, I navigated the crowd, the sea of black and white parting for me as if I were contagious. Men in $1,000 suits stepped back, their eyes widening as they took in the plunge of my neckline, the slit that rose dangerously high on my thigh. Women clutched their pearl necklaces, their faces twisting into masks of disdain. I felt like a match struck in a room full of gasoline. I kept moving, my eyes scanning the far end of the room. The layout was exactly as I remembered from the blueprints I'd studied until my eyes burned. The VIP area, the raised platform, and there he was. My breath hitched in my throat, a sharp intake of air that tasted like fear. Daunt. He was standing at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, surrounded by his lieutenants. He looked like a dark god. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, emphasizing the width of his shoulders, the lethal power coiled in his frame. He was listening to a man beside him, his expression bored, detached. He held a glass of scotch in one hand, the amber liquid catching the light of the chandeliers. He looked untouchable. He looked like a man who had never known a moment of fear in his life. I felt a surge of hatred so pure it almost brought me to my knees. I forced myself to keep walking, 20 feet, 15 feet. The circle of silence around me had grown so large that even he noticed the shift in the atmosphere. He frowned, his dark brows knitting together. He turned his head, slowly, lazily, and then he saw me. Our eyes locked across the distance, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the room faded into a dull roar, the faces of the crowd blurring into insignificance. There was only him, and me, and the history of violence between us. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical slap. His eyes, usually so cold and unreadable, widened imperceptibly. He froze. He went completely still, like a predator sensing a shift in the wind. The glass of scotch hovered near his lips, forgot. I saw his knuckles turn white as his grip on the glass tightened. I saw the mask of the indifferent businessman crack, revealing the dangerous, volatile animal underneath. The intensity of his gaze felt like a weight on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. It was a physical pressure. It was heat. It was a warning, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. I was trapped in his orbit, pulled in by the sheer gravity of his presence. My legs were trembling, the muscles quivering with the urge to run, to flee, to hide. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me that this was a mistake. Run, Kaya, run before he kills you, but I locked my knees. I forced one foot in front of the other. I let the red silk flow around me, a banner of war. I walked until I was standing at the foot of the raised platform. The men around him had gone silent, sensing the sudden, violent tension radiating from their boss. They looked from him to me, confused, wary. Dante didn't look at them. He didn't look at his security detail. He lowered the glass slowly to the table, the crystal making a sharp clack against the wood that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He straightened up, his full height looming over me. He was terrifying. He was magnificent. He was the man who had ruined my life, and he was the only man who could save it. You, he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and rough, vibrating through the floorboards and up into the soles of my feet. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. I lifted my chin higher, exposing the vulnerable curve of my neck. "Hello, Dante," I said. My voice was steady, shockingly steady. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, a tick, a sign that I had gotten under his skin. "And I believe," he replied, his eyes dropping to the slit in my dress before dragging back up to my face with a dark, hungry intensity, "that you are trespassing." "I'm not trespassing," I whispered, clutching the bag with the ledger tighter. "I'm negotiating." He stepped around the table. The movement was fluid, predatory. He closed the distance between us until he was standing inches away. I could smell him now. Sandalwood, whiskey, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of danger. He leaned down, his face close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You're not negotiating, little bird," he murmured, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper meant only for me. "You're playing with fire in a paper house." I looked up into his eyes, seeing the abyss staring back. "Good," I said, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs, "because I brought matches. I'm Tamsin Vale, 25 years old, and tonight I am the match that is about to ignite the entire criminal underworld." The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through my bones. Boom. The sound was a gunshot without the bullet. It vibrated in the floorboards beneath my stilettos. It sealed us in. The noise of the gala outside was instantly severed, replaced by a silence so thick it felt like water filling my lungs. I was alone, with him, Dante. He didn't move away from the door. He stood there, his hand still pressed flat against the wood, trapping me in his private library. The space was smaller than the ballroom, intimate and dark. It smelled of old paper, leather binding, and him. Sandalwood, danger, a sharp, masculine musk that triggered a primal alarm bell in the base of my skull. His presence filled the room until I could barely breathe. It was sucking the oxygen right out of the air. My chest rose and fell in short, shallow gasps against the tight bodice of my red dress. I tried to steady my heart. It was thrashing against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched his back. The broad span of his shoulders in that tuxedo was a wall of tension. He slowly turned to face me. His eyes were shards of ice, blue and piercing, cutting right through the silk and the bravado I wore like armor. He took a step toward me. I refused to step back. "You are breaking the treaty, Tamsin," he growled. His voice was a low vibration that resonated deep in my stomach, curling my toes inside my shoes. It wasn't just anger, it was restraint. He was holding himself back, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. A distinct, rhythmic tick. He was reminding me of the vow. The treaty my father signed in blood before he died. Dante Russo will never touch the Veil heiress. It was the only thing keeping me alive. It was the only thing keeping his empire from swallowing mine. But tonight, looking at the dark fire burning behind his icy stare, that vow felt fragile. It felt like a thread about to snap. "The treaty was a lie," I whispered. My voice shook, betraying me. I hated it. I swallowed hard, forcing steel into my spine. "It was built on a lie, Dante." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dark, jagged sound. "You walk into my house," he said, stepping closer. "Wearing that dress." His eyes dropped. They raked over me, tracing the plunge of the neckline, the curve of my waist, the scandalous slit that exposed my leg. It felt like a physical touch. My skin heated under his gaze, a flush rising from my chest to my neck. "You parade yourself in front of my men," he continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Like a sacrificial lamb begging for the knife." "I'm not a lamb," I said. I took a step toward him. It was a reckless move, insane, but I was done running. I saw his eyes widen slightly. He hadn't expected that. He expected me to cower. He expected the frightened girl I was 3 years ago. But that girl was dead. I stepped closer again. We were inches apart now. The red silk of my skirt brushed against the fine wool of his tuxedo trousers. Swish. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. I looked up at him, tilting my head back to meet his gaze. I saw his pupils dilate. The blue was being swallowed by black. Hunger, raw, undeniable hunger that he couldn't hide no matter how much he hated me. My breath hitched. The air between us was electric, crackling with 3 years of unsaid words and untouched skin. He wanted to kill me. He wanted to claim me. I wasn't sure which urge was stronger. "You promised never to touch me," I challenged him, my voice barely a breath. His nostrils flared. He inhaled sharply, taking in my scent. "I promised," he rasped. "But you are making it very difficult to keep my word." His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. White-knuckled, straining, he was fighting a war inside his own body. I could feel the heat radiating off him, a furnace of repressed violence. I needed to end this. I needed to drop the bomb before the tension consumed us both. "I didn't come here to tempt you, Dante," I said. I reached into the small clutch I was gripping so hard my fingers ached. His eyes tracked the movement. Wary, predatory. He tensed, ready to strike if I pulled a weapon. But I didn't pull a gun. I didn't pull a knife. I pulled out the folded pages I had stolen from the safe house 3 hours ago. They were crinkled, stained with a drop of dried blood on the corner, my blood from a paper cut in my haste. "I came here to save you," I said. I held the papers out to him. He stared at them, then he looked at me, confusion warring with the rage in his face. "What is this?" he demanded. "Read it," I urged. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out. His large hand brushed against mine as he took the papers. The contact was electric. A spark zipped up my arm, shocking my system, making my knees buckle for a split second. He felt it too. I saw the flinch in his eyes. He snatched the papers away, breaking the connection as if I had burned him. He unfolded them. He began to read. I watched his face. I watched the transformation. I saw his eyes scan the first line, then the second. I saw the moment the words registered. The ledger pages detailed the shipments, not his shipments. The Rossi family's shipments, using his roots. Using his name, and the signature at the bottom authorizing it all, was his own consigliere. The betrayal was absolute. The silence in the room shifted. It wasn't heavy with lust anymore. It was heavy with shock. Dante's face went pale, the color draining from his skin. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, devastating realization. He had been hunting the wrong enemy. He had been hunting me. And all this time the snake was in his own garden. He looked up at me. The ice in his eyes was gone. They were wide, vulnerable, stripped of all defenses. The Rosses, he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. They set us up, I said, stepping even closer until I was firmly in his personal space. They killed my father and they were planning to kill you tonight. I pointed to the last paragraph on the page. Look at the date, Dante, look at the time. He looked, midnight, the library. He checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. He looked at the heavy oak doors he had just slammed shut. Then he looked at me. You didn't break the treaty, he said, his voice rough, unraveling. No, I said, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I came to rewrite it. The clock on the mantel began to chime. Dong, dong, midnight. We were still alive. But the handle of the library door began to turn. I'm Tamsin Vale, 25 years old, and the man who swore to destroy me is now the only thing standing between me and a bullet. The brass handle of the library door jerked downward. It hit the locking mechanism with a sharp metallic clack. It stopped. Then it jerked again. Harder. Someone was trying to get in, someone who wasn't on the guest list. Dante's eyes snapped from the papers in his hand to the door. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a visible ripple of tension that hardened his features into granite. The Rossi hit squad. They were here, right on schedule. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to cage break through bone and skin. I looked at Dante. The shock on his face vanished instantly. It was wiped clean, replaced by something colder, something deadlier. The capo was back. He dropped the papers. They scattered across the Persian rug like fallen leaves, the undeniable evidence of his betrayal forgotten in the face of imminent violence. Get down, he commanded. His voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a weapon, low, guttural, a silencer screwed onto a barrel. I didn't move fast enough. I was frozen, my heels rooted to the floorboards, my mind stuck on the terrifying rotation of that brass handle. Bang! A muted thud against the heavy oak. They were kicking it, or ramming it. The wood groaned around the hinges, splintering under the force. Tamsin, Dante roared. He moved. He blurred. He wasn't human in that moment. He was pure kinetic energy wrapped in a tuxedo. He crossed the distance between us in a single, fluid stride that ate up the space. But he stopped. He stopped inches from me. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken tension and the sudden, violent shift of our reality. His hand shot out. It hovered near my bare shoulder. He froze. His fingers curled inward, trembling with the effort of restraint. I saw the conflict rage in his eyes, a storm of blue and black. The vow. The promise that had kept his hands clean and my body safe for 3 years. Dante Russo will never touch the Vale heiress. It was a wall of ice between us. If he touched me, he broke the code. If he didn't, I died. The door splintered with a deafening crack. Wood chips flew into the room like shrapnel. Time seemed to suspend itself in the dust motes dancing in the dim light. Dante reached out, his fingers hovering inches from my neck, trembling with the effort of restraint. I swore I would never touch you, he whispered, his breath hot against my skin, smelling of whiskey and impending death. My lungs seized. I stared up at him, wide-eyed, waiting for the end of the world. But I never swore I wouldn't save you. The vow broke. He closed the gap. His hand cupped my jaw with a possessiveness that set my soul on fire. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a claim. It was a seal of a new and dangerous alliance. His calloused thumb dug into my cheekbone. His skin was rough, scorching hot, electric against the cool smoothness of my own. The sensation was a shockwave. It traveled straight down my spine, bypassing my brain entirely, and pooled in my belly like molten lead. I gasped. The sound was ripped from my throat, lost in the crash of the library doors finally giving way. But I didn't care about the doors. I didn't care about the gunmen pouring into the room. I only cared about the heat of his hand on my face. In that moment, the hatred died. It withered and turned to ash, and a dark, vengeful passion took its place, binding us together in a pact of blood and silk. He didn't let go. He yanked me against his chest. Hard, my body collided with his. It was a collision of stars. I felt the solid wall of his muscle, the rapid beat of his heart echoing my own, the terrifying power coiled inside him. He smelled of violence and salvation. Move, he growled into my hair. He spun me around, shielding my body with his own broad back. Gunfire erupted. Pop, pop, pop. Glass shattered somewhere behind us. A Ming vase exploded near the desk. Shards rained down like deadly confetti. Dante didn't flinch. He had his arm wrapped around my waist now, his grip like iron, crushing the silk of my red dress against my skin. He was dragging me toward the back of the room, toward the massive stone fireplace. "Where are we going?" I screamed over the noise of the assault. "Hell," he shouted back, his voice rough with adrenaline. "We're going to hell together, Tamsin." He kicked the iron grate of the fireplace. It swung open on hidden hinges, a black mouth in the stone, a secret passage. Of course, every monster has a bolt hole. He shoved me inside into the darkness. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and centuries of secrets. He dove in after me, pulling the heavy iron grate shut just as bullets chipped the stone mantel where my head had been seconds ago. Clang! Darkness swallowed us. Complete pitch blackness. I was breathing hard, gasping for air, my hands scrambling for purchase on the rough walls. "Dante," I whispered, my voice shook. I reached out blindly. My hand found the lapel of his jacket. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was bruising, possessive. "Quiet," he hissed. We stood there in the dark, pressed together in the narrow stone corridor. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against mine. The danger was behind a wall of stone, but the danger in front of me was far more potent. He was still touching me. He hadn't let go. His hand slid from my wrist up to my elbow, then to my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh as if to reassure himself I was real. His touch was exploring, mapping the territory he had denied himself for so long. My skin burned under his fingers. Every nerve ending in my body was singing, vibrating on a frequency that only he could tune. "You touched me," I breathed. The words hung in the stale air. "I had to," he replied. His voice was low, vibrating through his chest and into mine. "You broke the treaty." "The treaty is dead," he said roughly, "just like those men upstairs will be by morning." He moved closer. There was no space left. I felt the hardness of his body, the undeniable evidence of his adrenaline, and something else, something primal. "You saved me," I said. "I protected my investment," he countered. But his voice lacked the bite. It was a lie. We both knew it. He leaned down. I couldn't see him, but I could feel the heat radiating from his face. His lips brushed the shell of my ear, sending a shiver racking through my entire frame. "You were right, little bird," he whispered. "You brought matches." His hand slid down my back, resting possessively on the curve of my hip over the red silk. His thumb traced the exposed skin at the slit of my dress. And now the whole world is going to burn. I shivered, not from fear, from anticipation. I leaned into him, my hands clutching the lapels of his tuxedo, anchoring myself to him. I was done fighting him. I was done running. The Rossi family wanted a war? Fine. I had the devil on my side now, and for the first time in 3 years, the devil was holding me like he never wanted to let go. Lead the way, Daunt, I said, my voice steel. Let's burn it all down. He squeezed my hip, a silent promise of violence and retribution. Then he took my hand, interlacing our fingers. Skin on skin, palm on palm. The connection was absolute. He pulled me deeper into the dark, and I followed him willingly into the abyss. I'm Tamsin Vale, 25 years old, and tonight I am not a socialite, an heiress, or a victim. I am a ghost haunting the house of the men who tried to bury me. Rain slicked the cobblestones of the service courtyard, painting the world in shades of charcoal and oil. I crouched behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges, the wet leaves soaking through the knees of my black tactical trousers. My breath misted in the cold night air. I checked my watch. 23:59, 1 minute to midnight, again. My life seemed to revolve around this witching hour lately. 48 hours ago, I was in a red dress, staring down the barrel of a gun in Dante's library. Those 48 hours had dissolved into a jagged montage of safe houses, bitter coffee, and the smell of gun oil. We hadn't slept, we had plotted. Dante had laid out the blueprints of the Rossi manor on a scarred wooden table, his finger tracing the veins of the enemy's stronghold. You have 10 minutes, he had told me, his voice rough with exhaustion and smoke. Once I hit the docks, their security grid will fracture. The guards will peel off to protect the shipment. That's your window. I pressed my earpiece deeper into my ear canal. Status, I whispered. In position, Dante's voice came back. It was calm. Terrifyingly calm. He was kilometers away, perched on a vantage point overlooking the Rossi shipping yards, ready to unleash hell. Do it, I said. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for flight. A low rumble rolled through the ground beneath my boots. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a vibration. Then came the boom. A dull, thumping roar that echoed off the distant city skyline like thunder. Dante had just blown up 3 warehouses worth of contraband electronics. The sky to the east lit up with an angry orange glow. Sirens began to wail immediately, a discordant chorus rising from the harbor. Inside the manor, lights flickered. I heard shouting. Heavy boots pounded against pavement as the perimeter guards scrambled toward their vehicles. Chaos, beautiful, orchestrated chaos. Go, Dante commanded in my ear. I moved. I didn't run, running draws the eye. I flowed. I slipped from the shadows of the hedge to the servants' entrance, a nondescript gray door tucked away from the grand facade. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists, forcing the tremors to stop. I needed my hands. They were the only weapons I had brought. I keyed the electronic bypass Dante had given me. The light on the pad turned from red to green. Click, I pushed inside. The air in the hallway was stale, smelling of lemon polish and old dust. Silence wrapped around me, heavy and oppressive. I kept my back to the wall, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, turn left. The service corridor opened into the main gallery. It was dark, lit only by the moonlight spilling through the high windows. Portraits of dead Rossi ancestors stared down at me with judging eyes. I felt exposed, naked. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. Approaching the study, I whispered. Copy, Dante replied. You have 6 minutes left, don't get comfortable. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the master study. This was it, the belly of the beast. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The room smelled of cigars and arrogance. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the painting on the far wall, a grotesque depiction of a hunting scene. I gripped the gilded frame and swung it aside. There it was, the wall safe. It wasn't digital. Old money didn't trust circuits, they trusted steel. It was a Casimir 500 mechanical dial lock. Uncrackable to a layman, but I wasn't a layman. I stripped off my thin leather gloves, dropping them onto the carpet. My fingers were pale in the dim light, slender, calloused at the tips. I had spent 20 years at a Steinway practicing scales until my fingers bled, learning to feel the vibration of a string before the sound even hit the air. My piano teacher had called it the touch. Dante called it a master key. I placed my ear against the cold steel of the safe door. I closed my eyes. I shut out the distant sirens. I shut out the fear clawing at my throat. I shut out the memory of Dante's hands on my body in the tunnel. I focused entirely on my fingertips. I gripped the dial. The metal was freezing, biting into my skin. I turned it clockwise, slowly, so slowly. Grind, grind, grind. I felt the friction of the brass tumblers inside the mechanism. It was a symphony of mechanics. I was looking for the false note. The hitch, there, a microscopic resistance. Tiny clack that didn't ring true. I stopped. First number found. I spun the dial counterclockwise. My breath hitched. Sweat pricked at my hairline, cold and clammy. 4 minutes, Tamsin, Dante warned. I'm working, I hissed. My fingers were burning. The sensitivity required to feel the tumblers was agonizing. It was like trying to read Braille on a razor blade. Spin, spin, stop. The second tumbler fell into place. A distinct, heavy thud that vibrated through the steel and into my bone. 2 down, 1 to go. My heart was beating so hard it was interfering with my senses. Thump, 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 thump. I forced myself to exhale to lower my pulse. I needed absolute stillness. I turned the dial clockwise again. This was the hardest part. The final gate. The friction was increasing. The lock was fighting me. It didn't want to yield. My fingers slipped on the smooth metal. Panic flared hot and bright. Focus. I wiped my hand on my trousers and gripped the dial again. I closed my eyes tighter, visualizing the internal mechanism, the brass teeth interlocking. I turned it a fraction of a millimeter. Nothing, another fraction, nothing, another click. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard, a perfect, hollow snap of finality. I grabbed the heavy handle and pulled. The hinges groaned. The massive steel door swung outward. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, my knees nearly buckling with relief. I clicked on my penlight, aiming the beam into the dark maw of the safe. Stacks of cash, passports, jewelry. I ignored it all. I pushed aside a velvet bag of diamonds worth more than my life. I was looking for paper, and there it was, a thick leather-bound ledger sitting innocuously at the bottom of the stack. I grabbed it. My hands trembled as I opened the cover. I scanned the first page. Dates, names, shipments, bank accounts. It wasn't just illegal gambling or smuggling. It was human trafficking. It was political bribes. It was the blueprint of a criminal empire built on blood and misery. This wasn't just evidence. This was a death sentence for the entire Rossi bloodline. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Got it, I whispered. Good girl, Dante growled in my ear, the praise dark and heavy. Now get out, the guards are turning back. I shoved the ledger into the waistband of my trousers, the leather cool against my skin. I had the ammunition. Now I just had to survive long enough to pull the trigger. I'm Tamsin Vale, 25 years old, and 5 minutes ago I was a classical pianist. Now I am a thief holding the death warrant of the most powerful crime family in the city tucked inside my waistband. The heavy steel door of the safe swung shut with a near-silent hiss of well-oiled hinges. I spun the dial. Locked. I wanted to leave no trace. I wanted them to open this vault tomorrow morning and find their empire hollowed out from the inside, unaware until the moment the feds kicked down their doors. My heart was still doing backflips in my chest. I pressed a hand to my sternum, willing the organ to slow down. Tamsin, Dante's voice crackled in my ear, a lifeline of gravel and smoke. You're clear on the south corridor. Move now. Moving, I whispered. I felt the ledger against my lower back. It was hard, unforgiving. It dug into my spine, a physical reminder of the target I had just painted on my own back. I turned toward the heavy mahogany doors. My boots made no sound on the plush Persian rug. I reached for the brass handle. Click. The sound was distinct. It wasn't the door latch. It wasn't the settling of the old house. It was the mechanical, two-stage engagement of a hammer pulling back on a semi-automatic pistol. And it came from directly behind me. My blood turned to ice water. I hadn't heard the window open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Whoever was behind me had been waiting, watching. Don't turn around, a voice said. My breath hitched in my throat, strangling a scream. I knew that voice. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't a Rossi hitman. It wasn't a stranger. It was the voice that had read me bedtime stories when my mother died. It was the voice that had whispered jokes during boring galas. Marcus, I breathed, the name scraping out of my throat like sandpaper. I said, don't turn around, Tamsin. I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. The cognitive dissonance was too violent. My brain refused to process the auditory data without visual confirmation. I turned slowly. My hands were raised, palms open, trembling slightly. Marcus stood in the shadows of the heavy velvet drapes. He looked wrecked. His blonde hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were rimmed with red, wide, and frantic. And in his right hand, he held a matte black Glock 19. It was pointed directly at the center of my forehead. The barrel was shaking, violently. Marcus, I said again, my voice sounding small like the child he used to protect. What are you doing? I'm saving you, he spat, though the gun didn't lower. I'm trying to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life. By pointing a gun at my head, you chose him, Marcus said, his voice cracking. You chose Dante. After everything I told you. After every warning. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a car crash. The anonymous tips about Dante's cruelty. The photos of Dante with other women that had mysteriously appeared in my mailbox. The whispered rumors that Dante was the one who killed my father. It was you, I whispered. The realization hit me in the gut, sickening and heavy. You were the leak, I said, stepping forward. You fed me the lies, you isolated me. I protected you. He shouted, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet room. I kept you away from a monster, and what do? You run away with him in the middle of the night wearing that whore's dress. He gestured wildly with the gun, the barrel sweeping down to my attire before snapping back to my face. My red dress, it was ruined now. The silk was torn at the hem, stained with grease from the warehouse escape, dusted with grime from the Rossi hedges. But it was still red. It was still the armor I had chosen for myself. You're working for Rossi, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. How long, Marcus? How long have you been a spy? Since the beginning, he sneered. Your father was a fool, Tamsin. He was going to lose everything. Rossi offered stability. He offered a future. I did what I had to do to survive, to ensure we survived. We, I laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. There is no we. You sold my father out. You probably opened the door for the men who killed him. Marcus flinched. His hand shook harder. I did it for you, he screamed, tears spilling over his lashes. And look at you, a traitor to your father's memory, running around in the dark doing the dirty work for a rival gang. You're pathetic." The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. It coated my tongue bitter and dry. He had been my rock, my safe harbor. And all this time he was the storm. I looked at his shaking hand. I looked at his finger hovering over the trigger. He was terrified. He was weak. And suddenly the fear that had been paralyzing me simply vanished. It evaporated. A cold rage settled over me, heavy and comforting like a lead blanket. The world sharpened. My vision tunneled, cutting out the periphery, focusing entirely on the mechanics of the threat in front of me. I saw the sweat dripping down his nose. I saw the tension in his forearm. I saw the safety on the Glock was off. I heard Dante shouting in my earpiece, a tinny, distant sound demanding a status report. I ignored him. I didn't need Dante. I didn't need a rescue party. I didn't need a white knight. Marcus thought I was the same girl he had manipulated for years. He thought I was the fragile pianist who needed her hand held. He didn't know what the last 48 hours had done to me. He didn't know that the girl in the red dress had died the moment she stepped into Dante's car. "You think I'm a I asked softly. I lowered my hands, slowly, deliberately. "Stop," Marcus yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Keep your hands up." "You won't shoot me, Marcus," I said, taking a step toward him. "I will, I swear to God, Tamsin, I'll put you down before I let you ruin everything I've built." "Then do it," I challenged. I took another step. I was 3 feet away. "Pull the trigger." I watched his eyes waver. He blinked. That was his mistake. In this world, love is a liability. And hesitation is a death sentence. I saw the weakness in him, the gaping hole where his courage should have been. I felt the ledger against my spine, the weight of the truth anchoring me to the earth. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the judge. I was the jury. And tonight I was going to be the executioner. I locked eyes with him, letting him see the abyss staring back. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," I whispered, coiled like a viper ready to strike. "My father is dead, but his daughter, she's just getting started." I lunged. "I'm Tamsin Vale, 25 years old, and until this week my hands were insured for $2 million to play Mozart. Tonight I'm using them to break a traitor's bones." I moved before my brain even registered the decision. Marcus blinked. That split second of hesitation was the only invitation I needed. I stepped inside his guard, my body moving on pure instinct. Dante had drilled this into me only 4 hours ago in the dim light of a safehouse kitchen. Grab the wrist, step through, use his momentum. My left hand clamped over Marcus's gun hand, my fingers digging into the tender tendons. He gasped, his eyes widening in shock. He tried to pull back. That was exactly what I wanted. I pivoted on my heel, using his own retraction to pull him off balance. I slammed my other forearm into his elbow joint. I twisted. Hard crack. The sound was sickeningly loud. It sounded like a dry branch being stepped on in a quiet forest. It echoed off the steel walls of the vault. Marcus shrieked, a high, thin sound that didn't belong to the man I thought I knew. The Glock clattered to the floor. He crumpled to his knees, clutching his arm, his face turning the color of old ash. I didn't pause. I kicked the gun across the room, sending it skittering under a heavy oak desk. I stood over him. My chest was heaving. My blood was singing a song of violence I had never heard before. I felt powerful. I felt terrifying. "You should have pulled the trigger," I whispered, my voice trembling with adrenaline. The heavy mahogany doors exploded inward. Splinters of wood rained down on the Persian rug. I spun around, my hands coming up, ready to fight again. But it was Dante. He looked like he had walked through hell to get to me. His tuxedo jacket was shredded, hanging off one shoulder in tatters. His white shirt was stained crimson at the collar. His knuckles were split, raw and bleeding. He held a jagged piece of metal in one hand, looking like a demon of vengeance. His eyes were wild, scanning the room until they locked onto me. The panic in his gaze shattered the moment he saw I was standing. He looked at me. Then he looked at Marcus, sobbing on the floor with his arm bent at an impossible angle. Dante's chest deflated with a massive exhale. He dropped the metal bar. He crossed the room in 2 strides. His hands, bloody and warm, cupped my face. "Tamsin," he breathed, checking me for holes. "Did he touch you?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I handled it." Dante looked down at Marcus. His eyes went dead. There was no pity there. "The charges are set," Dante said, his voice flat. "The east wing is already burning. We have 90 seconds. "Leave him," I said. Dante looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. "He's not worth the bullet," I told him, staring at the man who had betrayed my father. "Let the fire decide his fate." Marcus looked up, sweat and tears mingling on his face. "Tamsin, please." I turned my back on him. I grabbed Dante's hand. "Let's go." We ran. The hallway was already filling with gray, acrid smoke. The heat was rising, a physical weight pressing against my skin. Alarms were blaring now, a cacophony of chaos that masked the sound of our footsteps. We burst out the side entrance, coughing, eyes stinging. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cool and sweet. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. "The ledger?" Dante asked, pulling me toward the cliff path. I patted my waist. "Safe. Good. Detective Miller is waiting at the rendezvous. By morning, the Rossi name will be synonymous with rot." We didn't stop moving until we reached the ridge. We stood on the cliffside, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Below us, the Rossi Manor was a beacon of destruction. Flames licked up the sides of the historic building, turning the night sky a bruised purple and orange. It was beautiful. It was the funeral pyre of my old life. I watched the windows blow out, showering the lawn with glittering glass. Dante stepped behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against his hard chest. His chin rested on top of my head. I leaned back into him, my legs finally giving way to the exhaustion. He held me up. His grip was firm, unapologetic, possessive. For weeks I had felt dirty. I had felt like a pawn. I had felt like the unclean girl tainted by a criminal underworld. But standing there, watching the empire of my enemies turn to ash, I didn't feel unclean. I felt baptized. The fire had burned away the fear. It had cauterized the wounds Marcus had left in my heart. Dante turned me around in his arms. The firelight danced in his eyes, reflecting a hunger that had nothing to do with survival. He ran a thumb over my cheekbone, smearing a streak of soot. "You did good, Tamsin," he murmured. "You ended it." "No," I said, looking up at him. My red dress fluttered in the wind, torn and dirty, but vibrant against the darkness. I placed my hand over his heart. I could feel it beating, strong, steady, in sync with mine. "The old world is dead, Dante," I whispered. "But us? Our reign has just begun." He didn't smile. He just leaned down and kissed me, tasting of smoke and blood and a future that was finally terrifyingly ours.